Hi, John Riandelar here, and I would like to share to you my reflection on the Holy Week. This week's celebration and commemoration of the Passion, Death, and Resurrection of Jesus is a fitting reminder for us Christians of the kind of life we ought to live to fulfill our calling, that is, to be like Christ, to mirror the life of Christ in us. You see, suffering and death have always been the recurrent theme of Christ's teaching. We read from the Gospel of John, for example, Jesus saying, "Amen, amen, I say unto you, unless a grain of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains just a grain of wheat. But if it dies, it produces much fruit." This is the kind of life that we have. Our life is a mix of suffering, death, and resurrection. Resurrection presupposes we have died from our pride, from our arrogance, from our self-sufficiency, died from our weaknesses, from our iniquities, died from our own selves. And death comes to us in many forms. It can come to us in the form of humiliations, failures, feelings of worthlessness, in the form of everything that is opposed to what we see and perceive as good, and yes, even in the form of sickness and death, physical death itself, sickness and death of a loved one and of our own selves. And this death within us is of course preceded by suffering. We suffer a lot, and it pains many of us, and even more severely if it is our loved ones that we see suffering. But this is the kind of life that we Christians are supposed to expect. Jesus makes this very clearly to us when he says to his disciples, "Whoever wishes to come to me, to come after me, must deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." Christ is no masochist taking pleasure in our suffering. No. Rather, he knows that the only way to experience resurrection is death on the cross. And that is why he had to endure all of these things, to follow the will of the Father for him. The Son he was, it was not easy for him. He had to literally sweat blood as he agonized on the Mount of Olives, as narrated by the evangelist Luke, a physician. He was in such agony, he prayed so fervently that his sweat became drops, like drops of blood falling on the ground. It beset him so much, his sweat, blood, to think of the pains he will have to endure from the hands of his accusers, from the hand of Pilate, from the thought of his death on the cross. And I would like to think it was even more painful for him to be betrayed by one of his disciples and to be denied by his most trusted friend. And he had to endure all of these things if only to save us from our sinfulness, from our weaknesses, from our slavery to sin. And this is how Jesus loved us. He loved us up to the very end. No wonder he said to his disciples in one of his discourses before his resurrection, "No greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Christ lived, truly lived, what he spoke of. In this Holy Week, we are invited to reflect on the passion and death of Jesus, so that the suffering that we experience in our life may become truly meaningful. Because our own passion and death will only make sense with Christ. Our suffering will only be valuable if we suffer with Christ. Only then do we experience a new beginning, a renewed hope, a renewed spirit and strength, a new life, a resurrection. And I would like to leave you with these two passages from St. Paul's letter to the Romans. They give more meaning to the pains of our life. If then we have died with Christ, we believe that we shall also live with him. The Spirit itself bears witness with our spirit that we are children of God, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ. If only we suffer with him, so that we may also be glorified with him. Praying for a truly Holy Week in the blessed Easter ahead.